So welcome to all participants and panelists to
सगळ्यांचं स्वागत
a
आहे.
webinar on
हे
pesticide
webinar
poisoning in India.
कीटनाशक कृती नेटवर्क
A webinar on implications for
वेबिनार
business
दिल्लीमध्ये आयोजित केलेला आहे.
accountability and regulatory reform. My name is Sarojini Rangam of
माझं नाव
Pesticide
सरोजिनी
Action
नेंगम आहे.
Network or PAN Asia Pacific, a regional network linked with PAN International
पॅन
working
इंटरनॅशनलशी आम्ही
towards
लिंक आहोत.
the elimination of the harm caused by pesticides and promotion of
कीटकनाशकामुळे
agroecology.
झालेला नुकसान त्याबद्दल आम्ही
The
बोलणार आहोत.
webinar is organized by the Maharashtra Association of Pesticide Poison Persons, or MAPP, the Pesticides Action Network Pan India and Pan Asia Pacific, together with Public Eye and the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, ECCHR. We are now to share some of the work that we are doing to get justice and accountability for a group of Indian farmers and workers who were poisoned by a pesticide marketed by Swiss agrochemical giant Syngenta. We will also discuss the way forward for regulating pesticide use both in India and Europe. Just a bit of background. In 2017, hundreds of small-scale farmers and farm workers were poisoned, and over 20 died in just a few weeks while spraying pesticides on cotton fields in the district of Yavatmal in central India. A key product involved was the insecticide Polo, manufactured by Syngenta. The use of Polo's active ingredient diphenthioron is long banned in Switzerland and the European Union, but Syngenta keeps selling it in countries where regulations are weak and less strictly enforced. So in September 2020, Public Eye, ECCHR, Pan India, and MAP filed a specific instance with the Swiss National Contact Point for the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on behalf of a group of 51 affected farmers to demand that Syngenta provides remedy and changes its sales practices in India. At the same time, a claim for compensation was filed in the Court of Basel by the law firm Skadenswalte on behalf of the families of two victims who died and a farmer who was severely injured. So this is the background, and we would like to share with you what has happened in Yavatmal in 2017, and as a result, the actions and the organizing of the communities to ask for justice and accountability, and how Pan India stepped up together with ECCHR, Public Eye, Pan AP to provide support to ensure that they get accountability and justice from Syngenta, as well as to expose what's happening in Yavatmal and in India in terms of pesticide poisoning. So we have with us a few panelists, but I would like to introduce Mr. Devanand Pawar, and it's a pleasure to invite Devanand from MAP, who will give us what happened in Yavatmal. Devanand Pawar is the convener of Maharashtra Association of Pesticide Poison Persons, or MAP. It is a community organization formed in 2018 in Yavatmal and is a collective of pesticide poison victims, relatives of those who died, farmers, and supporters.
कीटकनाशक विषबाधा झालेल्या पीडित मरण पावले
Action with CSOs and others to prevent harmful impacts of pesticides and agrochemical use. And they use various mechanisms of awareness building, campaigning, speaking to government officials, both nationally and globally, to bring justice to the survivors of pesticide poisoning. Devanan, please, can you share your presentation?
नमस्कार पवार साहेब, आपण देशाचे शेतकऱ्यांचे भाग्यविधाते आहात. आपण यवतमाळ जिल्ह्याच्या भेटीला आलेत याबद्दल आम्ही समाधान व्यक्त करतो. यवतमाळ जिल्हा अनेक संकटातून प्रवास करत आहे आणि आज शेतकरी शेतमजूर कीटकनाशकांमुळे ज्यांचा इथं जीव गेला, जवळजवळ 21 लोक या ठिकाणी मृत्युमुखी पडले. ही विदारकता, ही जीवघेणी स्थिती आपल्या नजरेस यावी म्हणून आम्ही आपल्यापुढे याची पूर्ण चित्रफीत ठेवत आहोत. आम्हाला विश्वास आहे की आपण नक्कीच यामध्ये शेतकरी शेतमजुरांना न्याय मिळवून द्याल. जे बियाणं बोगस आमच्या माथी मारल्या गेलं, या सर्व प्रकरणाला आपण वाचा फोडाल अशी एक रास्त अपेक्षा शेतकरी न्याय हक्क आंदोलन समितीचा निमंत्रक या नात्यानं मी करतो आहे.
पंधरा दिवसापासून दवाखान्यात चाललो, पण मला काही ठणक कम नाही झाली. दवाखान्यात आणखीन उघडता नाही उलाले माझे डोळे, एकदम ठणकच आहे मला डोळ्यातनी.
प्रायव्हेट ट्रीटमेंट करा, हे इथं नाही तर माणसं मरतील. आता इथं किती स्थिती 450 किती आहे तुमच्या?
शेतामध्ये गेलं तर फवारणी करायला, तर फवारणी करताना फवारणी गेली पेट्रोल पंपमध्ये. नंतर मग ते औषध गेलं डोळ्यामध्ये जसे गेलं का ठणक सुरू झाली.
मुंबईमधल्या रेल्वे दुर्घटनेत मरणाऱ्या लोकांना 10 लाख रुपये, विषारी दारू पिऊन मरणाऱ्यांनाही 10 लाख रुपये. मात्र फवारणी करता करता या जगाच्या पोशिंद्याला स्वतःचा जीव धोक्यात घालताना मात्र फक्त 2 लाख रुपये दिल्या जाते. ही तफावत आम्हाला जाणवते आहे. यावर आपण सरकारचे कान पकडावे.
हेलो एवरीबॉडी, रेड्डी साहब, और मैं सभी को बताना चाहता हूँ कि 2017 में जो महाराष्ट्र में खास तौर पर यवतमाल में जो हादसा हुआ था, उसमें अगस्त लास्ट वीक पॉइजनिंग के पेशेंट आना चालू हो गया.
देवानंद जी, आप मराठी में बताओ, ट्रांसलेशन है.
ओके, ठीक है. सर्व उपस्थितांचे या ठिकाणी मी मनापासून स्वागत करतो आणि मला या मीटिंगला बोलावल्याबद्दल धन्यवाद. महाराष्ट्रामध्ये यवतमाळ जिल्ह्यात जे पॉयझनिंगचं प्रकरण पुढे आलं, कीटकनाशक विषबाधा प्रकरण, आणि त्या प्रकरणामध्ये मोठ्या प्रमाणात शेतकऱ्यांचा मृत्यू झाला आणि अनेक लोक गंभीररित्या त्यामध्ये त्यांना दुखापत झाली. ऑगस्ट लास्ट वीक मध्ये जेव्हा आम्हाला ही गोष्ट समजली की गव्हर्नमेंट हॉस्पिटलला मोठ्या प्रमाणात रुग्ण दाखल होत आहे आणि ते केवळ पॉयझनिंगचे पेशंट आहे, कॉन्टॅक्ट पॉयझनिंगचे पेशंट आहे अशी जेव्हा माहिती मिळाली तेव्हा आम्ही हॉस्पिटलमध्ये त्या ठिकाणी प्रत्यक्षात भेटीला गेलो. सप्टेंबर फर्स्ट वीक आणि सप्टेंबरच्या नंतर मोठ्या प्रमाणात रुग्णांची संख्या गव्हर्नमेंट हॉस्पिटलला वाढू लागली आणि त्या ठिकाणी शेकडो रुग्ण दवाखान्यामध्ये भरती होते. त्यांना त्या ठिकाणी बेड सुद्धा उपलब्ध नव्हते आणि रुग्ण तडफडत होते. आम्हाला समजत नव्हतं की नेमका हा काय प्रकार आहे. मग आम्ही त्या ठिकाणच्या जे मेडिकल कॉलेजचे डीन आहेत त्यांच्याशी संपर्क साधला आणि त्यांना बोललो की हे जर प्रकरण इतके रुग्ण येत आहे त्याचं नेमकं कारण काय आहे. तर त्यांनी म्हणाले की हे सर्व कॉन्टॅक्ट पॉयझन आहे. कोणीही शेतकरी शेतमजूर जे कोणी असेल जे कीटकनाशकाची जी फवारणी करतात अशा लोकांना या ठिकाणी विषबाधा झालेली आहे. मग आम्ही सर्व मीडियाच्या लोकांना दवाखान्यात घेऊन गेलो आणि तिथलं जे चित्रण आहे ते सर्व आम्ही महाराष्ट्र आणि संपूर्ण देशभर दाखवलं की इथं रुग्ण कसे तडफडत आहे, त्यांना किती वेदना होत आहे. एका रुग्णाला पकडायला 5-5, 6-6 जण, ज्यामुळे त्यांना झटके येत होते, असाऱ्या अशा वेदना होत्या. या सर्व प्रकारामध्ये रुग्णांची फार दुरावस्था होती आणि हे सर्व प्रकरण आम्ही जेव्हा जगाच्या समोर आणलं त्यावेळेला मग अनेक या क्षेत्रात काम करणाऱ्या लोकांनी यवतमाळला येऊन भेटी देण्याचा कार्यक्रम आखला. त्यामध्ये महाराष्ट्रातून, देशातून आणि विदेशातून सुद्धा अनेक लोक आले. तर सर्वप्रथम आम्हाला त्या ठिकाणी जे काही इलेक्ट्रॉनिक मीडिया आणि प्रिंट मीडिया आहे त्यांच्या समोर जेव्हा हा प्रश्न उपस्थित झाला तर त्यानंतर पॅन इंडियाचे संचालक डॉक्टर नरसिम्हा रेड्डी आणि त्यांची संपूर्ण टीम यांनी स्वतःहून आमच्याशी संपर्क साधला आणि त्यांनी सांगितलं की नेमकं प्रकार काय आहे. शेतकरी शेतमजूर या कीटकनाशक विषबाधा प्रकरणामध्ये कसे काय इतक्या मोठ्या प्रमाणात गंभीररित्या दुखापत होत आहे आणि लोकांचा जीव जातोय. एका यवतमाळ जिल्ह्यामध्ये 22 लोक मृत्युमुखी पडले, 22 लोकांचा जीव गेला, 886 लोक हॉस्पिटलाइज झाले आणि ते सुद्धा गव्हर्नमेंटच्या रेकॉर्डवरची लोक आहेत. आणि जे गव्हर्नमेंटच्या रेकॉर्डला आली नाही, ज्यांनी खाजगी रुग्णालयामध्ये, प्रायव्हेट हॉस्पिटलमध्ये ज्यांनी उपचार घेतला असे अनेक रुग्ण आहेत. आणि संपूर्ण महाराष्ट्रामध्ये जवळजवळ 56 लोक दगावली, 56 लोकांचा जीव गेला. मोठ्या प्रमाणात यवतमाळच्या लोकांचा जीव गेला. अकोला, अमरावती, नागपूर, बुलढाणा, वाशिम, चंद्रपूर प्रत्येक जिल्ह्यातल्या शेतकऱ्यांचा जीव गेला. आणि हे कॉटनवर फवारणी करणारे जे लोक होते त्याच लोकांचा यामध्ये मोठ्या प्रमाणात जीव गेला आणि अनेक शेतकरी त्यावेळेला दुखापतीत अडकले, शेतकरी आणि शेतमजूर. आता या विषयावर कधीही यांची नोंद होत नव्हती. पण जेव्हा पॅन इंडियाचे संचालक नरसिम्हा रेड्डी यवतमाळला आले आणि त्यांनी जेव्हा आम्हाला सूचना केल्या की त्याचं रेकॉर्ड व्हायला पाहिजे, ते नेमकं कशामुळे या लोकांना हे पॉयझनिंग झालेलं आहे त्याची माहिती पुढे यायला पाहिजे. मग आम्ही त्या ठिकाणच्या जिल्हाधिकारी महोदयांना भेटलो, त्यांना विनंती केली. त्यावेळी डॉक्टर राजेश देशमुख म्हणून कलेक्टर होते आणि त्यांनी विनंती मान्य केली. गव्हर्नमेंटला आम्ही पत्र लिहिले, चीफ सेक्रेटरीला पत्र लिहिलं आणि सर्वांना विनंती केली की यामध्ये जे लोक गंभीररित्या दुखापतीत अडकलेले आहे आणि ज्यांचा जीव गेलाय त्यांच्या नोंदी झाल्या पाहिजे, त्यांची कुठेतरी नोट झाली पाहिजे. आणि एक गोष्ट आमच्या लक्षात आली की अनेक लोकांना बोलता येत नाही, चालता येत नाही, काम करता येत नाही, आजही ते गंभीर पद्धतीनं त्यांचं जीवन जगत आहे. त्यांचं सामाजिक, आर्थिक सर्व प्रकारचं त्यांचं नुकसान झालेलं आहे आणि हे लोक असह्य अशा पद्धतीचं जीवन जगत आहे. ते आता काम करू शकत नाही, ते आपल्या कुटुंबाला खऱ्या अर्थानं न्याय देऊ शकत नाही, त्यांच्या मुलाबाळांना 2 टाइमचं जेवण देऊ शकत नाही, त्यांचं आरोग्य देऊ शकत नाही, त्यांना शिक्षणाच्या सुविधा देऊ शकत नाही. म्हणजे अशा अनेक अडचणी या परिवारांच्या समोर उभ्या राहिलेल्या आहेत आणि त्यांचं कोणी ऐकूनही घ्यायला तयार नाही. पण मी या ठिकाणी पॅन इंडियाचे संचालक यांना धन्यवाद देईल आणि विशेषतः ख्रिश्चन आणि त्यांच्या संपूर्ण टीमला धन्यवाद देईल की गांभीर्यानं लक्ष घातलं आणि त्यांनी या सर्व लोकांना न्याय देण्याची भूमिका घेतली. सुरुवातीला हे गरीब लोक, कष्टाळू लोक यांना अशिक्षित असल्यामुळे यांना कसं लढायचं, कोणाकडे जाऊन लढायचं हेही माहित नाही. पण या लोकांच्या माध्यमातून त्यांच्यामध्ये लढण्याचं बळ आलं आणि आता न्यायालयीन लढाईसाठी हे लोक सज्ज झालेले आहेत. कालपर्यंत यांच्या मनामध्ये एक न्यूनगंड होतं, एक भीती होती आणि या भीतीपोटी हे लोक कुठेही न्याय मागण्यासाठी घाबरत होते. पण जेव्हा त्यांना समजलं की पॅन इंडिया, MAPPP आणि आपल्या ख्रिश्चनची टीम हे सर्व लोक त्यांना न्याय देण्यासाठी सज्ज झालेले आहे आणि त्यांनी आता आमच्यावर विश्वास केला आणि आमच्यावर विश्वास ठेवून या लढाईसाठी त्यांनी पुढाकार घेतलेला आहे. ही लढाई आपण ताकदीनं लढलो पाहिजे. या लोकांना तर न्याय मिळेलच, पण भविष्यामध्ये असे प्रकरण होऊ नये, भविष्यामध्ये अशा प्रकारच्या घटना घडू नये यासाठी या प्रकरणाला ताकदीनं लढणं गरजेचं आहे. आणि म्हणून आम्ही ठरवलं की काही होईल तरी चालेल, कंपन्यांनी कितीही आपल्यावर दबाव वाढवला, कंपन्यांनी कोणत्याही प्रकारचे या ठिकाणी प्रलोभन दिली तरी कुठेही डगमगायचं नाही. या लोकांना न्याय मिळवून दिल्याशिवाय आता स्वस्थ बसायचं नाही, ही भूमिका आम्ही घेतलेली आहे. आणि आमच्या भूमिकेला या ठिकाणी जे लोक गंभीर दुखापतीत आता अडकलेले आहे किंवा ज्या लोकांच्या घरच्या लोकांचा जीव गेलेला आहे त्या लोकांनी या लढाईसाठी आता स्पष्ट भूमिका घेतलेली आहे. आणि म्हणून ही लढाई आपण सर्वांनी मिळून जर लढून या लोकांना न्याय देऊ शकलो तर येणाऱ्या भविष्यामध्ये कोणत्याही कंपनीकडून केवळ नफेखोरीच्या नादामध्ये लोकांच्या नशिबी जहाल कीटकनाशके मारल्या जाणार नाही आणि त्यांचं जीवन धोक्यात घातलं जाणार नाही याचा विश्वास मला वाटतो. आणि म्हणून या लढाईसाठी आम्ही कुठल्याही स्तराला जायला तयार आहोत. फक्त एवढाच मला या ठिकाणी विश्वास पाहिजे की जी चमू आमच्या सोबत उभी आहे त्यांनी पूर्ण ताकद आणि आपलं जे काही या ठिकाणी या लोकांना न्याय देण्याची भूमिका घेतलेली आहे ती ताकदीनं वापरावी. आम्ही त्यांच्या पाठीशी खंबीरपणे उभे आहोत. धन्यवाद. थँक्यू.
Thank you, Mr. Devanand. I think your message is very strong and very clear that we need justice for those who have suffered pesticide poisoning in Yavatmal and in Maharashtra. And I think you're organizing together the farmers and workers to stand up for their rights. I think it's a very important and way forward to really get the accountability and justice that the farmers, those who have been poisoned, their relatives and their survivors will continue and we will support and continue this struggle together. So thank you very much. And as always, it's a pleasure to invite the next speaker, who is Dilip Kumar, the Assistant Director of Pesticide Action Network India. And he will present the involvement of Syngenta pesticide in this poisoning. Mr. Dilip Kumar is a postgraduate diploma from the University of Cape Town, South Africa, and on pesticide risk management. Since 2013, Dilip has been doing research and documentation on the ground reality of pesticide use in India and its public health and environmental impacts. He has been documenting and campaigning on the mass pesticide poisonings of farmers and farm workers reported in Yavatmal in 2017. Dilip, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to this session. So we know that the unfortunate incidents of occupational poisoning of farmers and farming community in Yavatmal and its neighboring district happened in 2017 was one of the worst examples of public health impact of pesticide use. Soon after the pesticide poisoning was reported in the media, Pan India conducted a fact-finding mission and we brought a report which is available in public domain now. And many of the pesticides were reported as responsible for the poisonings of farmers and farm workers in Yavatmal, which include Syngenta's pesticide Polo. And later in 2018, Pan India conducted a detailed research And here I'm presenting some of the facts we gathered in that. Kindly allow me to share my presentation. So as I mentioned, PANAP initiated a study in Yavatmal in 2018 and which continued to 2019 as well. So our task was mainly to identify the victims of pesticide poisoning. For that, we tried to gather a list of pesticide poisoning from official sources in Yavatmal. Based on the list identified, we were able to identify the villages where more number of poisonings are reported, and thus we were able to interview victims of poisoning in more than 150 villages in 9 sub-district or tehsils in Yavatmal district. The official list of victims of pesticide poisoning were obtained from 4 sources, which include the Yavatmal District Administration, Sri Vasantarao Naik Government Medical College Hospital in Yavatmal, District Health Office in Yavatmal, and District Police Office. The data gathered from Police Office contained name of the victims as well as the name of the pesticide that caused the poisoning. The other list did not contain name of pesticides. This slide shows the study area map where PANAP conducted its research, and this is the national map of India where you can see this is Maharashtra, and this one is the state map of Maharashtra with the district divisions, and down below is the Tehsil map of Yavatmal district. The highlighted part in green tint shows the area where PANAP conducted its exploration in the field. Now let us see the kind of evidences we analyzed on the poisoning incidents. Medical records was one of them, where we have a hospital discharge card which is issued to the patient when they leave the hospital, and the image in the right side shows the discharge card where around the middle part of this image you can see diagnosis where it was written polo poison. So this is one of the evidence, and then we have official record from police department. Then we also have purchase bills of polo and polo packages available with the victims. We also interviewed victims and their relatives to understand from where they obtained polo, how it was being applied, what was the protective gears they were using, on which crop it was using, and all. So the evidence of polo use we analyzed. Based on that, we basically focused on the police record and Yavatmal Medical College data for identifying the victims and interviewing them. The police record has a list of 349 poisoning cases where it reported polo cases for 91 victims, and we interviewed 29 of the 94 victims, and we were able to conclude a list of polo poisoning with conclusive evidences after screening the available evidences that we have noted 20 cases and 2 deaths where polo was actually implicated in. And based on the data we gathered from medical college, actually there was 450 cases mentioned in that list, and we interviewed 208 victims among them, with polo reported in 51 cases. And after the screening all the available evidences, and we concluded that polo was implicated in 35 cases. And now let us have a look at the injuries and health effect reported by the victims, which include neurological illness, ophthalmological illness, respiratory illness, dermatological illness, gastrointestinal illness, and others. So the major symptoms reported by the victims are dizziness, giddiness, headache, restlessness, weakness, and some victims also reported unconsciousness. And eye burn, irritation, watering from eyes, blurred vision, reduced vision, and temporary loss of vision were reported by many victims. Breathing difficulty was the respiratory illness identified, and one of the doctor informed us that the death happened mainly due to respiratory paralysis. So the sufferings of the community is like now when this poisoning happened, they developed some symptoms, and immediately they were taken to the hospital or clinic nearby their house. And after the first aid, they were referred to higher hospital, which is the Yavatmal Medical College Hospital, and they were available treatment there. Many of the victims were showing involuntary movements and restlessness, so they were tied to bed and mm, after the treatment or when they were clinically stabilized, they were allowed to go home. And the advice of the post hospitalization include nutritious diet and 1 week to 3 months of complete rest. And many of the victims, they still suffer health issues such as dizziness, weakness, and blurred vision, and they are unable to continue their profession as they used to do before the poisoning, even after 3 years of the incident.
Hello.
We also analyzed the pesticide use conditions in Yavatmal, and major problems we noted are listed here. None of the victims we interviewed reported whether they received any training on pesticide use and safety measures. And we all know that following safety measures is important, and none of them were received any training or information on the kind of safety precautions they had to be followed when pesticides are used. And personal protective equipment is one of the integral uh, part for preventing exposure and poisoning. And our study showed that the personal protective equipment suitable for the task, especially in the humid and hot weather, was not available, nor they are accessible to the farming community. And for some farmers or workers, some sort of protective gears were available, such as gloves or mask, but they are unable to wear it because they cause suffocation and uneasiness for the work they had to do. And this slide, I try to address the kind of regulatory steps taken by the government of Maharashtra soon after the poisoning happened. So in 2017, when the poisoning cases were reported, in November, government of Maharashtra brought a temporary ban on 5 pesticides, which includes diphenthrin. You can see that in the list here, which is an integral part of the pesticide polo by Syngenta. And again in 2018, the same ban was reinforced for another period of 60 days when pesticide poisoning was reported in 2018 as well. Because state governments in India are not allowed to go for a permanent ban of pesticides, the Maharashtra government reported the issue to the union government and requested the union government to completely ban these 5 pesticides. And also Maharashtra government appointed a special investigation team to study the whole issue of mass poisoning, and they gave their report. I think this report is also available in the public domain now. And this SIT report points to lack of adequate protective gears, then hot and humid climate, ultra low volume sprays, mixing of pesticides, non-legible pesticide labels, etc. are the major reasons of poisoning, among others. One of the important thing that this SHG report noted that poisoning with pesticides that do not have antidote leaves less chance of giving proper treatment, and the quotation below is taken from the SIT report, where it mentioned the same thing, that it becomes impossible to give proper treatment to poison affected patient based on symptoms and in absentia of antidotes, and thus the chances of patient mortality increases. And now let us see what is polo. The active ingredient of the pesticide polo from Syngenta is diphenthrin, which is a thiourea compound. Although the World Health Organization's classification based on acute toxicity for diphenthrin is class 3, which is slightly hazardous, PAN has classified it as a highly hazardous pesticide as it can cause severe damages. And please be noted that diphenthrin do not have antidotes, and the health effects are eye irritation, respiratory irritation, toxic if swallowed or inhaled, and it is also a probable kidney toxic. And this information is obtained from the pesticide property database available online. And the European Chemical Agency has noted that diphenthrin is toxic if inhaled and may cause damage to organs through prolonged or continuous exposure. It is banned in Switzerland due to its effects on human health and environment. Since January 2020, it has been classified as a particularly dangerous substance and it cannot be exported from Switzerland anymore now. And below the slide, you can see poisoning symptoms such as poisoning may cause symptoms of subdued behavior, prostration, lethargy, so and so. And this is from the leaflet of Polo, and it also mentioned now this kind of symptoms: headache, dizziness, vertigo, nausea, vomiting, blurred vision, sweating, excessive lacrimation, salivation, etc. And many of these poisonings were actually reported by the victims we interviewed. And this is the end of my slide. Thank you so much. Thank you for patient hearing.
Thank you, Dilip. That was a very good overview of the links between the pesticide poisoning in Yavatmal and Polo. So I think you made a good link, very clear link, I think. Thank you very much for that. I would like to now call on the next speaker. And it's really a honor to call upon Christian Kliman, who is the Senior Legal Advisor in the Business and Human Rights Department of the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. And he will talk about the quest for justice and accountability for Yavatmal farmers and workers in Switzerland. Christian is a trained lawyer by background and focused on business accountability in ECCHR, and he has a particular focus on health damages caused by hazardous pesticides. He has dedicated a lot of his time to stop the export of manufacturers. Oh, I'm sorry. He also dedicates a lot of his time to the issue of arms export control and the accountability of arms manufacturers for crimes committed with the weapons they produce. So in both fields, Christian has worked together with affected individuals and civil society organizations in bringing cases against corporations to national and international judicial fora. Please take it, Christian.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sal. I think you've already introduced basically what I'm going to talk about, and I think it nicely flows also from how Devanand ended his presentation. So there will be other speakers after me who will probably talk a little bit more about the role of the government and how also the issue of pesticides needs to be regulated. Because in the particular case that we're looking at, we can see that there are several factors that come into play that lead to the situation where people in the end really get poisoned after using pesticides. But what I want to talk about is mainly focused on the role of companies in this particular constellation. And when it comes to the poisonings in 2017 in Yavatmal, it's particularly the role of a Swiss company, which is called Syngenta, who is producing the product Polo that at least some of the farmers who were poisoned in 2017 have used. So the question is, when companies do sell those products that are dangerous and they lead to poisonings, what level of accountability can you attach to that company? How can you seek the company to be accountable for the poisonings that people have suffered from? And when you approach this question, then you first of all have to think about basically what are the standards that you can put into place according to which a company would have to act, and what does the company have to respect. And there you have basically two levels. You have an international level where you have some standards and norms that actually regulate company behavior. I'm not going into the details, but just to mention them, it's the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, but you also have the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. And they both address kind of company responsibilities to respect human rights, but also to respect the environment, for example. And then logically, in each country, we have the law that is applicable in this particular jurisdiction, and all the companies also have to abide by those laws. And also for the case of pesticides poisonings, the laws might offer people who suffered from poisonings an actionable right that they can put into place or bring to courts in order to ask for the accountability of a company who might have sold that product. So when we come back to the particular constellation we are in right here, and we have heard from Dilip the number of people who have used polo and who have suffered from poisonings, and that are now regrouped basically also in the organization that Devanand introduced, which is MAPPP. Together with this group, we have kind of thought about what are the possibilities, legal possibilities that they can use to make the Syngenta company accountable. And in the end, in a collaboration with all the people who are present here and then also lawyers in Switzerland, there are two things that some of the people who have suffered from polo poisoning have done. The first one is that a group of 51 people have filed a so-called OECD complaint that relates back to the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises that I just mentioned. These guidelines, they expect from companies that they respect human rights. And in order to do so, they have to assess the risk of human rights violations whenever they engage in a business practice. When they can identify those risks, they have to basically do their best and what they can do in order to mitigate those risks and avoid that they actually materialize. But in case those risks have materialized and human rights violations have been occurring due to the business practice, these companies then are also demanded basically to provide a remedy for those violations and the sufferings that have occurred. And that is basically what a group of 51 farmers are asking in a so-called national contact point in Switzerland. They do argue that the Syngenta company has violated the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises by selling a product, polo, to a group of farmers who couldn't properly understand the warnings, who didn't have access to any PPE, so they couldn't protect themselves. And all of that was known to the company, and that consequentially, some of those people have suffered from poisonings. And they directed kind of this complaint to the national contact point, and this contact point can offer its good offices to the parties, and that's basically what they have done. They have offered to the 51 and also the other organizations that co-submitted the complaint the possibility to enter a mediation with the Syngenta company about their quest for remediation. And that's exactly where MAPPP and some of the other organizations that are present here are currently at. Due to a confidentiality of those proceedings, at this point in time, nothing more can be said. The complaint itself, though, is public. Everyone who wants to have kind of a more detailed read of what the claims are can have a look at this complaint. And for the rest, we will have to wait how this mediation will unfold in the future. The second process that 3 people or 3 families have started is a legal court case in a civil court in Switzerland. So we have the families of 2 farmers who have died due to poisonings. And we have 1 farmer who suffered severe health damages after using polo. And the 3 families have submitted a claim for compensation in a civil court in Switzerland, also against the company Syngenta, because they have sold this product. And they argue their case on the basis of product liability law. So that is something that exists basically in most of the national jurisdictions. In this particular case, it is needed that the Swiss product liability law is applied because we are in a Swiss court and there are rules for the question what kind of law needs to be applied in those cases. And for the constellation where 3 Indian plaintiffs make a claim in a Swiss court, on that basis, it's the product liability law of Switzerland that is applicable. And in essence, what they argue is that under product liability law, a manufacturer of a product is liable for the harm that occurs to a person who uses a product when this product had a defect, and this defect in the end caused the suffering or the harm to the person. And the argument of the plaintiffs and their lawyers in the Swiss court is that the product polo as sold in 2017 in India had a defect because, first of all, the warnings on the products, as I already mentioned for the other case, they were insufficient to really transmit the message and the risks that are attached to the product. So people couldn't properly prepare against the dangers of the product. And they also argue that there's, for example, you would call this a monitoring defect. So companies of the size of Syngenta selling hazardous products, they are also under the obligation to monitor the performance of their products in real life conditions. When they realize that there are recurring problems and that poisonings occur because there is no possibility to safely use it, they would have to adapt their sales practice so as to avoid these problems to reoccur in the future. So these are just two arguments that the farmers rely on. There are more that they rely on in this court case. And this, in terms of process, is currently pending with the Court of First Instance. So there was one, let's say, negotiation attempt, which is compulsory in Switzerland, where the lawyers from Syngenta and the lawyers from the plaintiffs have sat together and discussed if there's a possibility for, to finding an amicable solution to it. So far, this has not materialized, which is why the case now acceded to the Court of First Instance. So these are kind of in some two processes that with the help of MAPPP and the other organizations, first a group of 51 farmers have submitted with the national contact point for the OECD, and 3 further people have submitted to the courts. Right now, we can't really say where this is going. These are difficult procedures. They might take a long time, and logically the company will defend against these claims. So the outcomes are not entirely clear yet. We are in the process, and this is just basically to inform where these two processes for justice currently stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Christian. I think that was quite clear in terms of what the two, mechanisms are in terms of the court case in Basel and the OECD process in terms of looking at the 51 pesticide survivors of Polo. So thank you for that clear, providing a good understanding of what's happening in those two mechanisms. Now I would move on. I just want to say that those who have questions, please, there is a question and answer button at the bottom of the Zoom panel. So please, share your questions, and we will try to answer it in the open forum. So we'll move on, and it's a pleasure to call on Anina Dalbert, who is the legal advisor on corporate accountability for Public Eye, and she's focused on business and human rights for the last 6 years in different roles with Public Eye, Amnesty International, and a Swiss-based law firm. Anina has been involved in this particular case over the last a few years. Here she will share the need for an export ban and mandatory human rights due diligence. Anina, please share your presentation.
Thank you. Yes, I will also share my presentation. If you give me one moment. Okay, just go back to the beginning. Okay, I hope that's working with the presentation. Yes, so I want to, in addition to what we've already heard from the other panelists, I want to talk about one different dimension a little bit, and that is what kind of legislation we can have, and now especially focused on the perspective of Switzerland, so the home country where now in this case Syngenta has its seat, but also a little bit about the European context, as there are some other companies, of course, who have similar issues. So now, first of all, we want to look at a little bit these exports. As we've already heard, Polo has been exported out of Switzerland. So difenthrin, one of the main ingredients, the active ingredient, has actually been produced here in Switzerland and then exported, in this case, to India, but also to other countries. We as Public Eye, together with ECCHR and PAN, have been working on this for a few years, and it was particularly in 2018 17, 18 that we started to do this work. And we then decided to publish this report here in Switzerland, which showed exactly what we have already heard, what had happened in Yavantmal back then, and the fact that there is also this particular pesticide, polo, that is involved. We focused here particularly on Syngenta because, as I have mentioned, and Christian also, it is a company that has the seat here in Switzerland and is based here in Switzerland. This had quite some effect, and there was a lot of news reporting on it, because especially also because of this additional dimension that we don't always have of the double standards of showing that it is a pesticide that is prohibited here in Switzerland and in other European countries, because it is considered to be too toxic for the environment and also harmful for people. So they don't want to have it here, but it is okay to still export it to another country, which of course is not what we agree on. Why we could even show that it was exported is because of the fact that if we have a pesticide that is exported from Switzerland, we can obtain this export notification if the pesticide is banned here in Switzerland. This is this so-called PIC ordinance, and you can see here, particularly on the right side, you can see the importing country. Here is India, the exporting country is Switzerland, and you can see that it is also quite some quantity that has been exported. Here the probable date of first export is 2017, but we have also had similar notifications of 2016. The name of the company and of the importer itself is here not listed, but still due to the context, it is clear that Diafenturion, that this was actually something that Syngenta back at the time, at least, still exported out of Switzerland to third countries. Now, as a result of that, there was here in Switzerland a politician from the Green Party who had support of 41 other members of parliament who submitted a bill demanding to prohibit the export of those pesticides that are banned here in Switzerland, so that they no longer can be produced here, even though they're banned, but exported to other countries. And there was actually strong public and political support for this export ban from the very beginning. Here we can see, just to show there that polo isn't, or Diafenturion as the ingredient isn't the only one. This is a list of banned pesticides that were exported out of Switzerland since 2012. A research that Public Eye made, so also to show that there are actually other ingredients. Here you can see, for instance, to Brazil or South Africa, there have also been a lot of exports. So in this bill and in the whole discussion, all of those were included. And as of October 2020, Switzerland then did actually decide, as a result of this request by the parliament, to ban pesticides such as Diafenturion and for others, and the export ban entered into force in January of this year. From now on, that means that pesticides such as polo, so with the active ingredient of Diafenturion, and which have been banned due to their effects here, can no longer be exported from Switzerland. That doesn't seem to work. Here, we can also see at the same time that this is not only something that here in Switzerland is looked at, but we also have on the EU level, we have some developments, and we have seen that there also there is a request now that they want, the request was mentioned last October from the Commission, that they propose to actually prohibit in a similar manner than we have it here in Switzerland now, the export of such pesticides. And this has been due to, among other reasons, this has been following an investigation by Public Eye and Unearthed that showed all kinds of different dangerous and banned pesticides that are exported out of the EU to all different kinds of countries, as you can see it here on the particular map. In addition to that, the Commission's decision was also after there were 36 experts from the United Nations that called on the countries to end this practice of exporting it to poorer nations, these chemicals that they forbid in their own country and that are very hazardous. So that's the first block and the first part I wanted to talk about. However, as you can imagine, because they are international companies, this is a good start and it's a good sign to show that, you know, it's really not acceptable to have these double standards. However, at the same time, this is something that's rather easy to circumvent for them, because it doesn't mean that they can no longer produce or sell them. It just means that they cannot produce them here in Switzerland and then export them. But they can still do that in another country. They can and continue the practice to some degree. So in our opinion, this is just one puzzle, one piece of the puzzle, but there also needs to be other legislation in order to, as we have also heard in one of the comments in the chat, to also focus on the prevention part. And one possibility to do this is the so-called mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence legislation that has been something that we discussed here in Switzerland now for a long time, for the last 10 years, but is also discussed in many other European countries and on a European level, as I will show you. So what do we want there, or what did we want with this 10-year campaign here in Switzerland? We wanted to exactly focus on this prevention. And as Christian has mentioned, there's this internationally accepted guidance, and we just want to implement that into Swiss law, showing that Swiss business, they have to respect human rights and international environmental standards. They have this obligation to respect it, not only here, but also if they are obviously having business practices in other countries, they need to respect it in a similar way. The instruments that is used for that, this is the so-called due diligence, which basically means that you have to assess your risk as a company and see where your main human rights and environmental risks are. You have to then take steps and act on it. If has already something happened, there is a remediation part, and you also have to publicly report on all of this. And as an enforcement mechanism, we suggested that we have the civil liability also to have the third access to remedy, so that in cases such as this one, if something has already happened and it falls within the scope, that there is actually also some justice for the affected people. Unfortunately, we had, after a very long campaign in last November, it very, very narrowly failed here in Switzerland. We had a majority of the people, but we did not have a majority of the so-called cantons, which you can see here in the different color. So actually, we did not manage to introduce this law, but we definitely did manage to start this discussion and to convince a majority of the Swiss population that this is not okay and that something has to change here in the practice. So obviously, we will continue our work here. At the same time, you can see on a European level that there's also a lot of development. And just this month, Germany, where Christian is from, has adopted a law, and also Norway, there's a law in France, and there are negotiations on the European level where there will be a legislation proposal coming out probably this fall. Now, why do we think that this is also important? I've mentioned it, but I think I really want to come back to it just as a summary one more time before I finish. That is exactly this focus on prevention. Because in this particular case, for instance, if Syngenta would go through this step, they couldn't just go and sell a pesticide that is hazardous, where there is clearly no PPE, where there's no protective equipment, and they know about the situation. Then this is a good example of where they have to do this due diligence and they actually have to act and change. At the same time, we also think that the liability part of it, that is also an important one, because in this particular case, it is unclear if it's enough. It's possible that you can also have other product liability cases, but of course we're very much at the beginning of this case. We don't know where it will be going, and this is a particular case because we still had at the time the production also here in Switzerland. But in addition, these kind of legislation with mandatory human rights due diligence, if they have also civil liability, they can be an additional legal ground for potential liability. Either those two can be used at the same time, or if the other one doesn't come in, then this can also be something helpful, because I think this third part, this pillar of access to remedy, and to make sure that there is also something for the victim where this injustice has happened to those affected people is also really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Anina. Thanks. Very interesting. Congratulations to Switzerland for banning export ban pesticides from Switzerland, and 5 pesticides. So amazing work of Public Eye, other groups in Switzerland for pushing this this very important outcome, I think. And I think you almost won the corporate accountability vote, I would say, the vote in Switzerland. So amazing. Thank you. I think it just requires a bit more support from the other, I think, provinces or in Switzerland, I think. So let's, continue to support this this corporate accountability law to come into reality in Switzerland. So amazing. Thank you, Anina. And congrats again. So now we have the pleasure to have our last speaker, who's not the last, but not the least. It's really an honor to invite Dr. Narasimha Reddy Donti to speak. He's the Honorary Director of PAN India. He has been a passionate campaigner on environmental and development issues, and he has contributed to the public discourse and policy changes in issues like electricity, seed, rice, cotton, sugarcane, sericulture, handloom and textiles, land and water, and many other areas. He has built campaigns, advocacy programs, and policy change projects. He's an author, and he's also able to guide students on their PhD and other research activities. And we know each other for many years now, and it's really great to be here together with Dr. Narasimha Reddy. Please, Doctor, please make your presentation.
Thank you, Saro. In 2017, when we began this webinar with the talk we have seen that video. You might have noticed one old woman, a mother, who was very concerned about a patient on the bed. That moved us very much when we were there. So in 2017, when Dilip and I were there, we could see a lot of confusion, who has to do what. And I think we could see that government was completely, confused on what to do. In fact, district collector, he wrote a report and he said he did not know what is happening until 25th of September, when delegation led by Devanand has met him. Until then, it was almost 20 days, continuous flow of patients into hospital. And these people identified this pesticide poisoning, and they reported to the collector. And then only then I think some action started. Now I think this flux situation where government regulators did not know what to do, and it continues even now. When you look at the way they respond, I think we can see that they don't know what to do. That's the least I can say. And of course, there is worse things to note as well. But in this episode, I think what we need to understand, I think my screen is not moving. Okay. The Yavatmal pesticide poisoning, like other pesticide poisoning, we documented a big similar case in 2002 in Warangal, now in Telangana. So if you look at Yavatmal case, you can see 4 elements which are there. I think even some participant was asking, what about prevention? I think the biggest concern for all of us is prevention. And I think all our work in the last 4 years has been to prevent recurrence of such episodes of human tragedy. So there are a lot of elements on prevention, but regulation is something else. A few we have seen, because it is not directly a issue of the state. It is also an issue of national level and international level. So what Anina has presented, and what was mentioned by Christian. So there are international links. I think we need to look at again and again the regulation. And regulation by itself does not help. I think we require enforcement. And there, I think we need a lot of innovative ideas, because Indian governance is now in a lot of liberal kind of environment. So I think enforcement requires much more diligence in such a scenario. And of course, medical management. There is a lot to improve there. In fact, when we did this report in 2017, much of our focus was on medical management as well, because when we have seen there, scenes where people are, lying on the floor and with some saline bottle hanging from a window. So they and then doctors, usually public hospitals have shortage of doctors and specialists. So there is a lot to do on medical management, and this report of ours emphasizes on what needs to be done. So this report we subsequently gave to Chief Secretary of Maharashtra, and of course the district collector. That was much before government of Maharashtra has established a special investigation team, which was mentioned by Dilip in his presentation. Now this special investigation team has given a report that was in 2018. It was established in November 2017, almost a month after this episode has happened. So they gave a lot of recommendations. I don't know if it is to say good or bad. Much of our recommendations are reflected in these recommendations. So somewhere our advocacy has worked. And as I said, because they were in a confusion state, and they were playing football, agriculture department saying, oh, we did not know, and it's medical health department has to do, and health department says these are registrations and permissions given by agriculture department. So it was a football, and ultimately pesticide companies, they said, no, we are no way to be blamed, because our products are very benign, they are not hazardous, they are given permissions to be used. So it's all, ultimately it came to farmers, they started blaming the farmers. So ultimately victims becoming the cause of the problem is, I think it's part of Indian governance, which we can see in many other cases. So here, one or two directions which we mentioned, and that was mentioned by the SIT. There, we had an Insecticide Act 1968. Though long back, it has a few sections which deal with pesticide poisoning. So medical examination is there, first aid issue is there, safety kit, safety kit has to be there, and then antidote issue. So they were all there in that section, but none of the agriculture department officials knew about it. So when our research mentioned that, then they reflected that in their report, and of course they gave a big report. Uh, so they flag one of the big issues, the vacant posts. So as I said, even though there are regulations, who is to do enforcement? So people are not employed. There's no filling up posts like inspector, pesticides inspector, and other things were not done. And a single person is given 3 or 4 tasks. So for them, this pesticide regulation is on the lowest priority. So these are some of the issues flagged by the uh, SIT report. So in terms of recommendations, they straight away went to monocrotophos. They said ban monocrotophos because now it is a very hazardous, highly hazardous pesticide. They also said, no antidote. Polo does not have antidote. So we also said that any pesticide without any antidote, the registration at the time of registration, they have to mention what is the antidote for this hazardous toxic chemical. So Polo does not have. So the recommendation was, if you don't have antidote, don't register or don't permit it. Third was, they said, pesticides are often mixed. So they said there has to be a compatibility chart, at least to say X pesticide is compatible with Y pesticide. Then the recommendation was pictorial form of information, in the leaflet.
Dr.
Sorry.
Narasimha, you need to wrap up. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I had actually more. I'll just run through. So these, I'll just mention a few, not one by one. So they wanted monitoring of identified hotspots, and then mandatory for pesticide companies. They said cost-free PPE kits to farmers. Now this is still being contested by the pesticide companies. They introduce a hazardous product, but they don't want to give a PPE protection kit for the farmers because farmers can't afford. Of course, there are issues in a tropical climate. Trainings, awareness on poisoning, these are all part of them. Special wards in local medical college was recommended. I think in Yavatmal, they have created a special ward. Health monitoring of spraying workers. In Yavatmal, now a few labor are becoming professional spraying workers. So these need to be monitored because their health. But interestingly, they recommended that if people and medically unfit farmers use this, there need to be filed cases against them as culpable homicide, which looks very churlish because if they are medically unfit, who is going? What about the company which introduces the poison? So pesticide should be declared as a disaster. The important thing is in the regulation, in 1968 regulation, there has to be a monthly report going to a district collector and the higher officials on poisoning. But that's not happening anywhere in India. Now the Maharashtra government has announced compensation 4 lakh rupees for death, and there's a disability 60%, all that are given. But the issue is, 4 lakhs is very less. Even High Court of Nagpur has commented on that. They said when you are giving compensation for a road accident victim, at least 20 to 25 lakhs, I think on the same level, it has to be on par kind of compensation. In terms of people who are surviving, I think that's a more difficult part because these pesticides are now weakening their immune systems and they are not able to work for lifelong. So the lifelong chronic issues requires much more financial support, but government has not responded accordingly. So of course, Dilip has mentioned that 5 pesticides have been banned. Among them is diafenthurian, which is only for 60 days. Now, just this is a final slide, Saurav. If you look at the laws in India, Insecticide Act 1968 is now it is under discussion for amendment since 2008 in India, and that draft has been changing. Last year in 2020, one draft was introduced in Parliament. So we contested that because it was not including liability and many other decentralization. So it was not farmer friendly or consumer friendly bill. So now right now it is with the committee, parliamentary committee. I think so. We have a more option to reform this pesticide management bill. So there, I think pesticide poisoning as a major problem needs to be recognized, and we'll try to get that introduced. Now, other act which is being mentioned by everyone is Consumer Protection Act, which was again amended in 2019. So there, defective and hazardous products are mentioned, but still in operation, I don't think no one has explored whether that will yield any succor for the farmers. Environment Protection Act is there, but since there is a specialized act, it does not work. But we have fundamental rights and a constitution, right to life and a right to healthy life. I think so. These are the rights which are used usually by us, whenever we contest industrial pollution cases. And of course, the International Code of Conduct on pesticide usage, where every country, including India, has signed, where this code came with the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. So this code is now, I think we are trying to use this basically to get support for the farmers who are poisoned by pesticides in Yavatmal and elsewhere. So I'll stop here, and if there are any discussions, I can answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Narasimha. And so we have a bit of time. I'm going to extend it for another 15 minutes. If it's okay with everyone, because we started late because of technical issues with the interpretation. So I will ask for your indulgence to continue this discussion, because there are some really good questions in the box. And I wanted to share this. The first one is, there was a question of saying that justice is important, but the question is really, how do we prevent this? Anyone would like to respond to this? I think, Anina, you were talking about prevention, and yes, and maybe Dr. Reddy.
Maybe Anina can go ahead, and I'll add.
Yes, I can start. I can just go back to, I try to highlight it and focus on it in the presentation already. I think there are different levels of prevention in terms of the prevention of regulation, what we can do in the countries where these companies are based. I think actually these kind of legislations that are now luckily taking on in European countries at least can at least contribute to the prevention, because if the companies would actually do the steps, and they would no longer close their eyes in terms of the human rights violations that happen, they have to go through it and really see, okay, where are my risks? I think this would definitely be one category that they couldn't just ignore, and they would definitely have to look into it and see how they could prevent these cases from happening. But then obviously, I think there are different levels of prevention. You have mentioned one already, also maybe you can add to it.
Yeah, as Anina said, I think at different levels we have prevention strategies. Simplest thing is stop using pesticides. So we can have agroecological approaches, encouraging farmers to go for organic methods of production. That's one, and in fact, we have, after our intervention in the 4 years, even before there was Mr. Subhash Sharma, who has been working in Yavatmal on organic methods of production. So we have conducted a number of sessions. I think a few farmers have already become organic or non-chemical methods. But that's one. But the second aspect, since we are discussing more the regulation and legal enforcement, I think the liability, once we build a liability into the regulation, I think that will act as a deterrence prevention because companies are going to be much more careful when they are introducing a very hazardous product and victimizing unaware or uneducated, illiterate farmers. So I think these two levels, I think we need to work as part of prevention. And third, I think we need to build more compensatory mechanisms and then disaster responsive mechanisms, like medical infrastructure, at least in these spots where pesticide poisoning is likely to happen, because there are intensive areas like in Punjab, we have seen in Tamil Nadu, Orissa. So there are quite a few places. I think there we need to reinforce medical infrastructure so that there is a faster response. So I feel these are all part of prevention as well.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. And then there was a question to Christian in terms of the cases. How long will they take to reach any conclusion? Christian, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I can briefly say something to that. So I think on the OECD complaint, the only thing that can be said is that in theory, according to the rules in Switzerland for this national contact point, cases should be concluded in a period of 12 months. If the issues are very complex, logically, it might need more time to conclude them, but the idea is to conclude those mediations after complaints have been submitted within 12 months. So that can be said on one process. And on the court case, it's a very long, it can be very long, it can be years. It really depends on, also the complexity of the case, how quick the judges are, how many experts you need to prove your points. And then if once a decision is rendered, is any one of the parties attacking this decision and going to the next level? So I think there is no clear expectation when the court case will definitely end. But perhaps Anina has more like statistical information on how long the court cases last in Switzerland.
Anina, you want to respond?
I think that was a very good answer. I think it's especially of these kind of cases, because we don't have many in Switzerland. There are no statistical things that I can add to it. We always try to say, it's really very difficult to prevent. It can be over at a very early stage if there's a negative decision and nothing is done about it, but it can also be 5 years, 10 years. I think you summarized it well.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian and Anina. So there is, I would like to actually acknowledge Dr. Dili Ram Sharma, who was the former Joint Secretary of Pesticide Management in Ministry of Agriculture, Nepal. They celebrate the No Pesticide Use Week from December 3 to 10 in Nepal, and he was quite instrumental to get the ban of 8 pesticides, so amazing, in Nepal while he was the joint secretary. So thank you, Dr. Dili Ram Sharma. And now I would like to go to the question from there was a question for you, Anina. I'm just looking for it. Yes, it says there, a question to Anina. Do you see any opportunities with upcoming MHRED for due diligence to have an impact on preventing pesticide poisoning, not only through the increased due diligence done by pesticide producers, but also from the point of view of companies importing goods produced with pesticides?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good question. It's really difficult to say at this point. I think it's a good hope that I think there are different kind of measures. There are also for some other issues, for example, more issues like forced labor that are in the supply chains. There are also discussions of import bans or different kind of measures. In terms of the due diligence, it is actually, if you look at the international regulations, it does say that it goes through the whole value chain. so that it's not enough, to only look at what am I doing as a company and what are my subsidiaries doing, but you actually also have to look at what are the suppliers doing, what kind of risks are there. And so if it would be a big supermarket chain here that falls within this kind of regulation, if we have the European or also other regulations that are already in place, I would think that is actually an aspect that they have to look into. Okay, what kind of products? Is there child labor? Are there any other issues, human rights or environmental issues that we have to look at? So it would be my hope, and it's clear that these kind of regulations, they won't prevent or they won't solve all of these issues, but it would definitely also be my hope in the same direction as the question is formulated, that it would also go into this direction and at least have some effect, but hard to say. What kind of effect exactly? It also then depends, on the enforcement mechanisms and what are they doing, how far are they going, what are the kind of consequences that these regulations have in place.
Thank you. Thanks, Anina. There is another question there's a question to Mr. Dilip. He said it's an excellent presentation, but in your presentation, in the government notification on November 1, it says only 18 people lost their lives and nowhere mentions Syngenta. But claims have been made of hundreds of deaths, including by me. I was keen to know about other companies, and out of the 94 victims, you interviewed 29, and basis that you singled out Polo. I was curious to know this aspect, please. Dilip?
Yes, actually, we do have records from the police department and medical college that there were 22 deaths happened in 2017 due to pesticide poisoning of farmers and farm workers. And so it is not 18. Maybe the 18 may be an earlier list. So when the final list came in, it is already 22 for Yavatmal district. And I think for the entire Vidarbha region, there were 63 deaths reported, which is also made in a submission in the parliament by the agriculture minister at that time. I remember that. And then the police records, actually there were 349 records of pesticide poisoning with the name of the pesticide involved in the poisoning, and where 94 cases reports Polo. And we were able to interview only 29 victims because of accessibility issues and all. And out of this 29, I think about 20 of them we have evidences for conclusive evidences for Polo use.
Thanks, Dilip. I think all that information is available on the web. Please check PAN India website and Public Eye, and also in terms of the OECD complaint to, it's on the ECCHR's website. That reports are all available. So please, we encourage you to review them and read them, and and join us in the campaign to prevent. I think the word prevent is really good, as well as to get justice for those who have suffered. Okay, now there's another question from a question here on, and I open it to all panelists. Syngenta's takeover by ChemChina can have implications on the case. Can you clarify? So maybe Christian or others can respond to this.
Shall I give it a start, or does someone else want to jump in? So perhaps just related to the legal case itself. So what we're looking at is at a situation where poisonings occurred in 2017. And for example, for a product liability claim, the claim would go against the manufacturer of the product that was sold back then. And kind of based on the research, it's clear that it's Syngenta, the company, who kind of produced this product back then, because they have the trademark on the product, and there might be subsidiaries involved as a manufacturer because they either produced it or were responsible for the exports. All these entities as a legal entity, they still exist independently of the question if now ChemChina has the majority shares and basically owns them as a legal entity. They still exist, and they were the ones that we consider as being the manufacturers back then, so they can still be sued. In the long run, independently of the court case, the takeover might have implications on how Syngenta generally runs its business and how it does its risk assessment, its corporate accountability approach. This still remains to be seen. Yeah, but it would only kind of apply at a later point in time and not be that relevant to the court case in that sense.
Thank you, Christian. Dr. Reddy, do you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Christian said. I think in India, because of India-China issue, it could be a political factor that China is controlling Syngenta, and Syngenta has a major responsibility in Yavatmal pesticide. So I think government of India should, basically come in and help the farmers because of the Syngenta case. And secondly, I think on the other side, we can see in terms of implication, what we are seeing in US where cases against Syngenta are piling up. So I think this is the first time a case from India has gone into international arena. So I think from a developing country, so it's also a test case where how multinational companies are responding to the issues, due diligence or liability issues to the countries where they are working. So I think this is a test case, both politically and I think in terms of regulation.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I'll just read this. I think we have an offer, I guess. He said that that he has filed review petition and government started review of 66 pesticides, 18 banned, 27 draft order came. Still my case in Supreme Court. If you give data regarding polo, either I file before JSPP or in the court a review petition. So there's an offer. So please, can I suggest Dilip and Dr. Reddy, contact this person to discuss this. So I will close the discussions in terms of question and answer and the open forum, and now give each of the panelists 1 minute to sum up and conclude. So who would like to volunteer? Who wants to go first? Devanan, can you do a quick sum up? 1 minute, please. Concluding remarks.
आपल्या सर्वांचं या ठिकाणी विश्लेषण मी ऐकलं आणि मला असं वाटते की आपल्या सर्वांची भूमिका ही पवित्र आणि न्यायिक पद्धतीची आहे. शेवटच्या माणसाला न्याय मिळाला पाहिजे यासाठीची जी आपली तळमळ आहे, तर त्यासाठी आपण जो लढा उभारलेला आहे त्यामध्ये आम्ही एक छोटासा घटक आहोत आणि आम्हाला असं वाटतं की आमचा जो शेतकरी आहे, आमचा जो शेतमजूर आहे, त्याला न्याय मिळवण्यासाठी आपण उभारलेल्या लढ्याला आपण बळ दिलं पाहिजे आणि म्हणून आम्ही तुमच्या सोबत ताकदीने उभे आहोत. फक्त कुठल्याही परिस्थितीत यामध्ये या लोकांना तर न्याय मिळवून द्या, पण शिवाय यांच्यासह भविष्यामध्ये कोणावरही असा प्रसंग उद्भवणार नाही आणि त्यांच्यावर त्यांचा जीव जाण्याची पाळी येणार नाही, त्यांच्या परिवाराला अशा यातना भोगण्याची पाळी येणार नाही. अशा पद्धतीची आपल्या सर्वांची भूमिका आहे आणि त्यासाठीचा हा जो लढा आहे, या लढ्याला मी भरभरून शुभेच्छा देतो आणि आमच्या सारख्याला या ठिकाणी आपण या लढ्यामध्ये आमच्यावर विश्वास दाखवला आणि या लढ्यामध्ये आम्हाला सहभागी करून घेतलं आणि त्या लोकांना न्याय मिळवून देण्यासाठी आमच्यावर आपण जी जबाबदारी टाकली त्यासाठी आपल्याला धन्यवाद देतो. आणि कुठलाही स्वार्थ न मनात ठेवता केवळ अन्याय ज्या लोकांवर झालेला आहे त्यांना या ठिकाणी न्याय मिळावा आणि त्यांच्यावर झालेल्या अन्यायातून त्यांच्या परिवाराला न्याय मिळावा यासाठीची जी आपली तळमळ आहे ती खरंच खूप मोठी आहे. कारण निस्वार्थ पद्धतीनं काम करणारे लोक अलीकडे पाहायला मिळत नाही, पण आपण इतका वेळ दिला, प्रत्येक वेळेला या लोकांच्या भूमिका ऐकून घेतल्या. त्या लोकांना, जे लोक अज्ञानी होते, ज्या लोकांना लढण्याचं बळ नव्हतं, त्या लोकांना लढण्यासाठी आपण तयार केलं. ही साधी सुधी गोष्ट नाही आहे. हा एक ऐतिहासिक लढा आहे. हा लढा, आणि या लढ्यासाठी आपण ज्या तळमळीनं जे प्रयत्न चालवलेले आहे, यामध्ये नक्कीच यश मिळेल. आपण कुठल्याही कंपनीला टार्गेट केलेलं नाही. आपण त्या अहवालाचा आधार घेतलेला आहे की ज्यामध्ये पोलीस विभाग आणि मेडिकल विभागाने हे सिद्ध केलं आहे की या कंपन्यांच्या प्रोडक्टमुळे या लोकांचं जीवन धोक्यात आलेलं आहे. त्यासाठी आपण सर्व कायदेशीर लढे उभारले. त्यासाठी आपण विधिमंडळाच्याही म्हणजे माननीय विधानसभा अध्यक्ष त्याच्याही पुढे एक बैठक लावली.
Okay. Yeah, we are losing you, Devanand. Thank you very much. And,
Thank you.
For the struggle for MAPPs and the pesticide poisoned survivors and victims. So thank you. Can I ask Dilip to do a 1-minute conclusion?
Sure, sir. Thank you. I think regarding the poisoning and the suffering of the community, I think we need to be able to stop these things. Anyway, I think where government can do a lot of things, including the policy framework and alternative action. And I think one of the other area of intervention is the monitoring of the pesticide poisoning. I think when Maharashtra government appointed a SIT committee, I think they have not referred to the records of police. So if they already referred it, they could have come with more stringent measures on the companies involved, and that kind of recommendation has not happened. Anyway, I think government of India is trying to update its legislation on pesticide management, which is long pending, and I think we would like to urge the government of India to come up with a comprehensive pesticide legislation that can address all these issues and end the harming of the community by toxic pesticides. That's all.
Thank you. Thanks, Dilip. Christian?
Yeah, thank you, Saro. Yeah, it's getting more and more difficult because the two people before me have already said good things. I think I can simply sum up by saying, just listening again now to all the speakers and to the interventions in the chat, I realized again how do you say that, how transnational the problem is. So that it's actually needed that this group of people, as we are present here, do come together on those issues, because the dots only connect when you have people from different places that engage in actions that kind of only, when put together, all of them might actually bring some change on this and kind of lead to a sense of justice or an element of justice and a change in the business practice. I can already say that we of ECCHR will definitely continue in Germany to work on the company accountability aspect of it. But I also think working on our governments in Europe can play a role, as Anina has shown kind of with her presentation. And just to mention, I've already seen also in the participants list, there are people from the Pesticides Action Network in Germany here. And also in Germany, we're currently trying to give it a push that some pesticides are being banned so that they're not actually exported anymore and lead to those poisonings. And with this, I think I stop. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christian. Now we have Anina.
Yes, thank you. There's much has been said already, so I'll keep it short. Also, I can only agree to everything that has been said before, and I would have said something in the similar direction. We actually just had a vote here in Switzerland, because we have 4 times a year this vote on 2 legislations on pesticides, also to ban pesticides that harm the environment and that are in the drinking water that we have here. But for me as well, this has shown again, how there are many different answers and many different parts of, as I've mentioned before, the big puzzle. And I think it has been really good that we have had such a good collaboration on this particular issue. And I think in general on pesticides, there are so many things that we still need to work on, and that PAN is working on, that I'm very happy to see that there are more people that are getting interested in this. So I think, yeah, it will be something that that isn't resolved very soon, but I am hopeful that it goes in the right direction. And I just want to thank everyone, especially also on the ground, for the work that they have been doing over the past years.
Thanks, Anina. Dr. Narisama?
Yeah, this unfortunate episode in 2017 in Yavatmal, it's happened only within a period of 1 month. But now we are seeing chronic pesticide poisoning all over India on a regular basis, and people are dying or they're getting hospitalized. So I think we need a stronger liability mechanism within national legislation, which is decentralized, where state governments can, in fact, ban or review the registration. Apart from that, I think the pesticide trade, international pesticide trade, is increasing. So from India, it's going to Africa, and maybe from Europe coming to India. So I think this pesticide trade needs regulation or a code of conduct much more beyond what is there already. So these kind of unfortunate episodes remind us of the need to get a international mechanism where liability is fixed on the companies which are doing this trade, and they have to take responsibility for their human and environmental tragedy because of their products.
Thank you. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Reddy. I would just like to make a small announcement. We just launched a No to the Toxic Alliance, which is the alliance between FAO and CropLife. And CropLife, as you know, is the association of the big manufacturers, producers of pesticides, from Syngenta to BSF to Bayer. So they are all there, and many other companies as well. And so FAO signed agreement, MOU, with CropLife and PAN and many groups, that is global groups, have sent a letter asking the DG, the Director General of FAO, to stop this alliance. Anyway, they've signed the MOU, so we're continuing our campaign. So please sign the petition to ask for no to the Toxic Alliance between FAO and CropLife. So just one announcement, and I would like to first of all thank all the panelists, the tremendous sharing, our participants who are here for extended period. So thank you very much for being there, and I appreciate, we all appreciate that. And to our partnership of PAN India, PANAP, EECHR, and Public Eye, I think it has been strengthening because of all the support that we are getting at the local level and also at the regional and international level. So thank you very much for this, and we'll see you next time. Oh, the PowerPoints, those PowerPoints will be made available, and we will share this. It's also available. We will also post it on Facebook, so check it out in Facebook. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you again for another webinar to stop pesticide poisoning and for agroecology. So thank you very much, everyone.